No, I'm going to have some chocolate. But feel free
Salutations.
Greetings.
Greetings, Carmen, of the wet hair. Very good.
I just took the longest bath. It was great.
Fuck yes. I made lasagna today. It took a really long time.
That was fucking sumptuous. It was so good. Best lasagna I've ever had.
I love lasagna when someone else makes it.
Yeah.
It takes so much time.
Hey everybody.
Hey.
Hello. Oh my god. Hey Malcolm, you're wearing like a shirt with almost all the buttons done up.
Because we had a dinner party this evening, like decadent bitches.
We've had a dinner party. Let's see where you are. We haven't had dessert yet. Actually, we've got something very sweet, and we were going to save it, but thought maybe we could have it now on screen with you. How would you feel about that?
Do you have a spoon?
Better than a spoon. You're a sausage.
What?
Oh
no! So you're gonna eat it off of Emma? Is that what you're saying?
No, she is the dessert.
She is the dessert.
Oh!
That is.
We do.
You're gonna have her on camera just
So
now.
disappointed. Like,
I mean, hi. Say hello to everybody.
Hi. We had a fancy dinner. It's been delicious.
It has been so nice.
you guys look amazing.
Yeah.
I borrowed clothes from Sam.
Frankie, well, one of my dresses.
I had
Very
a
nice.
dress on. I was wearing a dress.
I know, weird.
Weird, proper weird.
You look beautiful.
Liza, you look beautiful.
Apologies.
Excuse us.
Get carried away.
But yeah, thought she would come and say hello.
Hello.
Hi.
How are folks with their day?
Yeah, how's everyone else's days been?
Very lazy.
I made lasagna.
Ooh. What? Oh, what can you say here?
One way or t'other.
Lasagna is nice.
Yeah.
We're still in Uncle?
Okay.
There we go.
What did you base your lasagna with?
What did I what?
What was the base
What was the base?
of your
Isn't
lasagna?
it?
Like a tomatoey sauce
And
with
like
mushrooms.
Oh,
with mushrooms and like lentils, or mushrooms and mince, or mushrooms and
just mushrooms.
Just mostly tomatoes, mostly chopped tomatoes. I have not made any with fresh basil and fresh parsley before, so I think that made it much better. And instead of making a bechamel sauce, I just took like ricotta and put an egg in it and thingied it all up, and then put some cheese on top of that layer, so that it has a little bit more structure, because the egg like keeps the structure when it cooks.
That sounds good as hell.
Yeah, it's really nice to not have to make a whole cheese sauce.
Delicious. Goddamn delicious.
It was really fucking good, actually.
Really good.
Lush. Lush. Well, Malcolm made the world's best French onion soup. It is really good. I'm willing to put that out there.
I haven't had that in the longest fucking time. It's real. Okay.
the secret is onions.
Lots of them. But more than that. You know how many onions you're thinking? Like more than that.
Oh, I was already thinking of quite a lot of onions. Are you sure?
You sweet summer child.
Mm. And we still got dessert.
We still have dessert. So yeah, I'm probably going to disappear off relatively swiftly after official story time finishes, so that I can go and wrap my face around some chocolatey,
Nutty,
dainty, rummy, ice creamy, delicious.
I may have gone hard on the rum.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Well.
boink.
Life is difficult. Bad time.
You all look so lovely over there too. It looks like you're having such a nice time and all dressed up and such.
Yeah, having such a nice time. Also, M, have you cut your hair?
Is that just a standard question for you now?
I mean, I guess I did it, last Wednesday, and then I dyed it this morning while talking to Kitty.
Oh my god, it looks so good.
Thanks. I'm really happy with it. It's hard to tell, but there's some purple tucked in there, and the stripe along here that looks very blue is actually quite purple. But I'm happy with how that turned out, because I was like, well, if I fuck it up, I just won't ever part my hair that far.
You look like a sexy peacock.
I
Sorry, a sexier peacock. Even sexier than peacocks are, which is a lot.
It's pretty much all peacocks are, isn't it?
What, just sex on legs?
Yeah.
Sex on feathers?
Yeah.
Oh!
You're going to try doing a Kings of Leon song, aren't you?
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
Just minorly highlighting your time.
It's fine. Who else we got? Hi, Laura!
I'm on Laura. Laura's here somewhere. It's Kim. I'm on Laura's little iPad. Hi.
How you doing?
Laura's around. Laura, do you say hi? Yeah, Laura's just hi.
I mean, I say fuck her. She's not like, no, I say fuck you. I'm not interested in story time anymore.
No, she is. She's flatmate thing.
Yep.
She's doing other stuff. She'll be back.
Hi, Laura, for wherever you are, and hi, Kim, for being hello and right here.
Hi. I know I've been away a while. Hi, everybody.
Nice to see you back. And
You guys look so cuddly. I want to join and cuddle you guys.
Yeah, I know.
You look wonderful.
Carryover cuddles from the weekend.
Yes. I'm glad you're enjoying cuddles. Cuddles are important.
And it's actually not to our pre-time for a minute.
Oh, it's nearly story time, everybody.
I should probably move.
Do you want to go and do the things that you're going to do?
That makes it sound much more or less exciting. I mean, we're going to sit and have a drink.
Yeah, sit and have a drink and
Play some computer games.
play some games.
Very classic.
Yeah. We're going to have a much more exciting time. We're going to join the army.
That sounds like
Right, go on, you beautiful creatures. Farewell.
I'll see you at Storytime tomorrow, folks.
Now, why am I waving? I'm staying here. I'm going to read the fucking story. Goodbye. Bye.
I mean, or you could just wave and leave us all flabbergasted.
I would never.
No? Not even for chocolate and rum.
Well, that's different. Right, we're alone now. So I think it might be. Is it story time? Is it story time? Have I got makeup all over my face also? I put a little bit of slap on because it was a dinner party. And it feels weird. Feels strange. Right. I think it's potentially story time. And I was thinking that we would do pretty much exactly the same number of pages tonight as we did last night. How does that sound to people? Because last night we got up to page 44 and there was a convenient break. And I had a look ahead, and on page 88, there is a convenient break, which is so satisfying. It's so satisfying. So I think that we should just go hell for leather all the way to page 88. Yeah. Right. I'm going to assume that we are all met and mute you all. Now, are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Polly lay in the dark on a bed of musty straw. There was no question of anyone's getting undressed. The rain hammered on the roof and the wind blew through a crack under the door, despite Igor's attempt to stuff it with straw. There was some desultory conversation, during which Polly found that she was sharing the dank shed with Tonka Halter, Shufti Manacle, Wazza Goom, and Lofty Chute. Maledict and Igor didn't seem to have acquired repeatable nicknames. She'd become Ozza by general agreement. Slightly to Polly's surprise, the boy now known as Wazza had taken a small picture of the Duchess out of his pack and had nervously hung it on an old nail. No one else said anything as he prayed to it. It was what you were supposed to do. They said the Duchess was dead. Polly had been washing up when she'd heard the men talking late one night, and it's a poor woman who can't eavesdrop while making a noise at the same time. Dead, they said, but the people up at Prince Marmaduke Piotr Albert Hans Joseph Bernhard Wilhelmsburg weren't admitting it. That was cause what with there being no children, and with royalty marrying one another's cousins and grannies all the time, the ducal throne would go to Prince Heinrich of Slovenia. There, can you believe that? That's why we never see her, right? And there hasn't been a new picture all these years. Makes you think, eh? Oh, they say she's been in mourning because of the young Duke, but that was more than 70 years ago. They say she was buried in secret, and at which point her father had stopped the speaker dead. There are some conversations where you don't even want people to remember you were in the same room. Dead or alive, the Duchess watched over you. The recruits tried to sleep. Occasionally someone belched or expelled wind noisily, and Polly responded with a few fake eructations of her own. That seemed to inspire greater effort on the part of the other sleepers, to the point where the roof rattled and dust fell down before everyone subsided. Once or twice she heard people stagger out into the windy darkness, in theory for the privy, but probably, given male impatience in these matters, to aim much closer to home. Once, coasting in and out of a troubled dream, she thought she heard someone sobbing. Taking care not to rustle too much, Polly pulled out the much-folded, much-read, much-stained last letter from her brother and read it by the light of the solitary, guttering candle. It had been opened and heavily mangled by the censors and bore the stamp of the duchy. It read, "Dear all, we are in," which is with a big thing with knobs, on we will, which is just as well because out of. I am keeping well. The food is, will, at the, but my mate says not to worry. It'll all be over by, and we shall all have medals. Chins up, Paul. It was in a careful hand, the excessively clear and well-shaped writing of someone who has to think about every letter. She slowly folded it up again. Paul had wanted medals because they were shiny. That had been almost a year ago, when any recruiting party that came past went away with the best part of a battalion, and there had been people waving them off with flags and music. Sometimes now, smaller parties of men came back. The lucky ones were missing only one arm or one leg. There were no flags. She unfolded another piece of paper. It was a pamphlet. It was headed, "From the Mothers of Borogravia." The mothers of Borogravia were very definite about wanting to send their sons off to war against the Slabenian aggressor, and used a great many exclamation marks to say so. And this was odd, because the mothers in Mons had not seemed keen on the ideas of their sons going off to war, and positively tried to drag them back. Several copies of the pamphlet seemed to have reached every home. Even so, it was very patriotic. That is, it talked about killing foreigners. Polly had learned to read and write after a fashion because the inn was big and it was a business and things had to be tallied and recorded. Her mother had taught her to read, which was acceptable to Nuggin, and her father made sure that she learned how to write, which was not. A woman who could write was an abomination unto Nuggin, according to Father Jupe. Anything she wrote would, by definition, be a lie. But Polly had learned anyway, because Paul hadn't, at least to the standard needed to run an inn as busy as the Duchess. He could read if he could run his fingers slowly along the lines, and he wrote letters at a snail's pace with a lot of care and heavy breathing, like a man assembling a piece of jewellery. He was big and kind and slow, and could lift beer kegs as though they were toys, but he wasn't a man at home with paperwork. Their father had hinted to Polly, very gently but very often, that Polly would need to be right behind him when the time came for him to run the Duchess. Left to himself, with no one to tell him what to do next, her brother just stood and watched birds. At Paul's insistence, she'd read the whole of From the Mothers of Borogravia to him, including the bits about heroes and there being no greater good than to die for your country. She wished now she hadn't done that. Paul did what he was told. Unfortunately, he believed what he was told, too. Polly put the papers away and dozed again until her bladder woke her up. Oh, well, at least at this time of the morning she'd have a clear run. She reached out for her pack and stepped as softly as she could out into the rain. It was mostly just coming off the trees now, which were roaring in the wind that blew up in the valley. The moon was hidden in the clouds, but there was just enough light to make out the inn's buildings. A certain greyness suggested that what passed for dawn in Plume was on the way. She located the men's privy, which indeed stank of inaccuracy. A lot of planning and practice had gone into this moment. She was helped by the design of the breeches, which were the old-fashioned kind with generous buttoned trapdoors, and also by the experiments she'd made very early in the mornings when she was doing the cleaning. In short, with care and attention to detail, she'd found that a woman could pee standing up. It certainly worked back home in the inn's privy, which had been designed and built in the certain expectation of the aimlessness of the customers. The wind shook the dank building. In the dark, she thought of Aunt Hattie, who'd gone a bit strange round her 60th birthday and persistently accused passing young men of looking up her dress. She was even worse after a glass of wine, and she had one joke. What does a man stand up to do, a woman sit down to do, and a dog lift its leg to do? And then, when everyone was too embarrassed to answer, she'd triumphantly shriek, "Shake hands!" and fall over. Auntie Hattie was an abomination all by herself. Polly buttoned up the breeches with a sense of exhilaration. She felt she'd crossed a bridge, a sensation that was helped by the realization that she'd kept her feet dry. Someone said, "Psst." It was just as well she'd already taken a leak. Panic instantly squeezed every muscle. Where were they hiding? This was just a rotten old shed. Oh, there were a few cubicles, but the smell alone suggested very strongly that the woods outside would be a much better proposition, even on a wild night. Even with extra wolves. "Yes?" she quavered, and then cleared her throat and demanded with a little more gruffness, "Yes?" "You'll need these." whispered the voice. In the fetid gloom, she made out something rising over the top of the cubicle. She reached up nervously and touched softness. It was a bundle of wool. Her fingers explored it. A pair of socks, she said. Right, wear 'em, the mystery voice said hoarsely. Thank you, but I've brought several pairs, Polly began. There was a faint sigh. No, not on your feet. Shove them down the front of your trousers. What do you mean? Look, said the whisperer patiently. You don't bulge where you shouldn't bulge. That's good. But you don't bulge where you should bulge either. You know? Lower down. But I didn't think people noticed, said Polly, glowing with embarrassment. She'd been spotted. But there was no hue and cry, no angry quotations from the Book of Nuggan. Someone was helping. Someone who had seen her. It's a funny thing, said the voice, but they notice what's missing more than they notice what's there. Just one pair, mark you. Don't get ambitious. Polly hesitated. Is it obvious? She said. No, that's why I gave you the socks. I meant that I'm not really, said the voice in the dark. You're pretty good. You come over as a frightened young lad trying to look big and brave. You might pick your nose a bit more often, just a tip. Few things interest a young man more than the contents of his nostrils. Now I've got a favour to ask you in return. I didn't ask you for one, Polly thought, quite annoyed at being taken for a frightened young lad when she was sure she'd come over as quite a cool, non-ruffled young lad. But she said calmly, what is it? Got any paper? Wordlessly, Polly pulled From the Mothers of Borogravia out of her shirt and handed it up. She heard the sound of a match striking and a sulphurous smell which only improved the general conditions. Why, is this the escutcheon of Her Grace the Duchess I see in front of me? Said the whisperer. Well, it won't be in front of me for long. Beat it, boy. Polly hurried out into the night, shocked, dazed, confused, and almost asphyxiated, and made it to the shed door. But she barely shut it behind her and was still blinking in the blackness when it was thrust open again to let in the wind, rain, and Corporal Strappy.
All right, hands off. Well, you lot wouldn't be able to find him. And on with socks. Hup, hup, hi-ho, hup, hup, hup.
Bodies were suddenly springing up or falling over all around Polly. Their muscles must have been obeying the voice directly because no brain could have got into gear that quickly. Corporal Strappy, in obedience to the law of non-commissioned officers, responded by making the confusion more confusing.
Good grief, a lot of old women could shift better than you, he shouted with satisfaction as people flailed around looking for coats and boots. Fall in, get shaved, every man in the regiment to be clean-shaven by order. Get dressed, wasn't? I've got my eye on you. Move, breakfast in 5 minutes. Last one there doesn't get a sausage. Oh, dearie me, what a bloody shower. The 4 lesser horsemen of panic, bewilderment, ignorance and shouting took control of the room, to Corporal Strappy's obscene glee. Polly, though, ducked out of the door, pulled a small tin mug out of her pack, dipped it into a water butt, balanced it on an old barrel behind the inn, and started to shave. She'd practiced this too. The secret was in the old cutthroat razor that she'd carefully blunted. After that, it was all in the shaving brush and soap. Get a lot of lather on, shave a lot of lather off, and you had a shave, hadn't you? Must have done, sir. Feel how smooth the skin is. She was halfway through when a voice by her ear screamed, What do you think you're doing, private parts?
It's just as well the blade was blunt. Perks, sir, she said, rubbing her nose. I'm shaving, sir. It's perks, sir.
Sir? I'm not a sir, Parts. I'm a bloody corporal, Parts. That means you calls me corporal, Parts. And you are shaving in an official regimental mug, Parts, what you have not been issued with, right? You're a deserter, Parts.
No, sir, corporal.
A thief, then? No, Corporal. Then how come you got a bloody mug, Parts? Got it off a dead man, sir. Corporal. Strappy's voice, pitched to a scream in any case, became a screech of rage. You're a looter? No, Corporal. The soldier had died almost in her arms on the floor of the inn. There had been half a dozen men in that party of returning heroes. They must have been trekking with grey-faced patience for days, making their way back to little villages in the mountains. Polly counted 9 arms and 10 legs between them, and 10 eyes. But it was the apparently whole who were worse, in a way. They kept their stinking coats buttoned tight in lieu of bandages over what unspeakable mess lay beneath, and they had the smell of death about them. The inn's regulars made space for them and talked quietly, like people in a sacred place. Her father, not usually a man given to sentiment, quietly put a generous tot of brandy into each mug of ale and refused all payment. Then it turned out that they were carrying letters from soldiers still fighting, and one of them had brought the letter from Paul. He pushed it across the table to Polly as she served them stew, and then, with very little fuss, he died. The rest of the men moved unsteadily on later that day, taking with them to give to his parents the pot metal medal that had been in the soldier's coat pocket and the official commendation from the duchy that went with it. Polly had taken a look at it. It was printed, including the Duchess's signature, and the man's name had been filled in, rather cramped because it was longer than average. The last few letters were rammed up tight together. It's little details like that which get remembered as undirected, white-hot rage fills the mind. Apart from the letter and the medal, all the man left behind was a tin mug and, on the floor, a stain which wouldn't scrub out. Corporal Strappy listened impatiently to a slightly adjusted version. Polly could see his mind working. The mug had belonged to a soldier. Now it belonged to another soldier. Those were the facts of the matter, and there wasn't much he could do about it. He resorted instead to the safer ground of general abuse. So you think you're smart, Parks? He said. No, Corporal. Oh, so you're stupid, are you? Well, I did enlist, Corporal, said Polly meekly. Somewhere behind Strappy, someone sniggered. I've got my eye on you, Parks, growled Strappy, temporarily defeated. Just you put a foot wrong, that's all. He strode off. Said a voice beside Polly. She turned to see another youth wearing second-hand clothes and an air of nervousness that didn't quite conceal some bubbling anger. He was big and red-haired, but it was cut so close that it was just head fuzz. You're Tonka, right? She said. Yeah, and could I have a borrow of your shaving gear, right? Polly looked at a chin as free of hair as a billiard ball. The boy blushed. Got to start somewhere, right? He said defiantly. The razor will need sharpening, said Polly. That's all right, I know how to do that, said Tonka. Polly wordlessly handed over the mug and razor and took the opportunity to duck into the privy while everyone else was occupied. It was the work of a moment to put the socks in place. Anchoring them was a problem, which she solved by unwinding part of one sock and tucking it up under her belt. They felt odd and strangely heavy for a little package of wool. Walking a little awkwardly, Polly went in to see what horrors breakfast would bring. It brought stale horse bread and sausage and very weak beer. She grabbed a sausage and a slab of bread and sat down. You had to concentrate to eat horse bread. There was a lot more about these days, a bread made from flour ground up with dried peas and beans and vegetable scrapings. It used to be made just for horses to put them in fine condition. Now you hardly ever saw anything else on the table, and there tended to be less and less of it too.
You needed time and good teeth to work your way through a slice of horse bread, just as you needed a complete lack of imagination to eat a modern sausage. Polly sat and concentrated on chewing. The only other area of calm was around Private Maledict, who was drinking coffee like a young man relaxing in a pavement cafe, with the air of someone who has life thoroughly worked out. He nodded at Polly. Was that him in the privy? She wondered. I got back in just as Strappy started yelling and everyone started running around and rushing in and out. It could have been anyone. Do vampires use the privy? Well, do they? Has anyone ever dared ask? Sleep well? He asked. Yeah. Did you? Said Polly. I couldn't stand that shed, but Mr. Eyebrow kindly allowed me to use his cellar, said Maledict. Old habits die hard, you know. At least, he added, old, acceptable habits. I've never felt happy not hanging down. And you got coffee? I carry my own supply, said Maledict, indicating an exquisite little silver and gilt coffee-making engine on the table by his cup. And Mr. Eyebrow kindly boiled some water for me. He grinned, showing 2 long canine teeth. It's amazing what you can achieve with a smile, Oliver. Polly nodded. Is Igor a friend of yours? She said. At the next table, Igor had obtained a sausage, presumably raw, from the kitchen, and was watching it intently. A couple of wires ran from the sausage to a mug of the horrible vinegary beer, which was bubbling. Never seen him before in my life, said the vampire. Of course, if you've met one, you have, in a sense, met them all. We had an Igor at home. Wonderful workers. Very reliable, very trustworthy. And, of course, so good at stitching things together, if you know what I mean. Those stitches round his head don't look very professional, said Polly, who was beginning to object to Maledict's permanent expression of effortless superiority. Oh, that? It's an Igor thing, said Maledict. It's a look. Like tribal markings, you know. They like them to show. We had a servant once who had stitches all the way round his neck, and he was extremely proud of them. Really? Said Polly weakly. Yes, and the droll part of it all was that it wasn't even his head. Now Igor had a syringe in his hand and was watching the sausage with an air of satisfaction. For a moment, Polly thought that the sausage moved.
All right, time's up, you horrible lot, barked Corporal Strappy, strutting into the room. Fall in! That means line up, you shower. That means you 2 parts. And you, Mr. Vampire, sir, will you be joining us for a morning's light soldiering? On your feet. Where's that bloody Igor?
Here, sir, said Igor from 3 inches behind Strappy's backbone. The corporal spun round.
How did you get there?
He bellowed. It's the gift, sir, said Igor.
Don't you ever get behind me again. Fall in with the rest of them. Now, attention.
Strappy sighed theatrically.
That means stand up straight. Got it? Once more with feeling. Tension. Ah, I see the problem. You've got trousers that are permanently at ease. I think I shall have to write to the Duchess and tell her she should ask for her money back. What are you smiling about, Mr. Vampire, sir?
Strappy positioned himself in front of Maledict, who stood faultlessly to attention. Happy to be in the regiment, Corporal. Yeah, right, mumbled Strappy. Well, you won't be so... Everything all right, Corporal? Asked Sergeant Drakram, appearing in the doorway.
Best we could expect, Sergeant, sighed the corporal. We ought to throw him back, oh dear me, yes. Useless, useless, useless.
Okay, lads, stand easy, said Jackram, glancing at Strappy in a less than friendly way. Today we're heading on down towards Plots, where we'll meet up with the other recruiting parties and you'll be issued with your uniforms and weapons, you lucky lads. Any of you ever used a weapon? You have, Perks? Polly lowered her hand. A bit, Sarge. My brother taught me a bit when he was home on leave, and some of the old men in the bar where I worked gave me some tips. They had, too. It was funny to watch a girl waving a sword around, and they'd been kind enough when they weren't laughing. She was a quick learner, but she'd made a point of staying clumsy long after she'd got the feel for the blade, because using a woman as a sword was also the work of a man, and a woman doing it was an abomination unto Nuggin. Old soldiers, on the whole, were on the easy-going side when it came to abominations. She'd be funny just as long as she was useless, and safe as long as she was funny.
Expert, are you? Said Strappy, grinning nastily. A real fencing genius, are you?
No, Corporal, said Polly meekly.
All right, said Jackram. Anyone else? Hang on, Sarge. I reckon we'd all like a bit of instruction from Swordmeister Parts, said Strappy. Ain't that right, lads?
There was a general murmuring and shrugging from the squad, who recognised a right little bullying bastard when they saw one, but treacherously were glad he hadn't picked on them. Strappy drew his own sword.
Lend him one of yours, Sarge, he said. Go on, just a little bit of fun, eh?
Jackram hesitated and glanced at Polly. How about it, lad? You don't have to, he said. I'll have to sooner or later, Polly thought. The world was full of strappies. If you backed away from them, they only kept on coming. You had to stop them at the start. She sighed. Okay, Sarge. Jackram pulled one of his cutlasses out of his sash and handed it to Polly. It looked amazingly sharp. He won't hurt you, Perks, he said, while looking at the smirking Strappy. I'll try not to hurt him either, sir, said Polly, and then cursed herself for the idiot bravado. Must have been the socks talking.
Oh, good, said Strappy, stepping back. We'll just see what you're made of, Parts.
Flesh, thought Polly. Blood. Easily cut things. Oh well. Strappy waved his sabre like the old boys had done, down low, in case she was one of those people who thought the whole idea was to hit the other man's sword. She ignored it and watched his eyes, which was no great treat. He wouldn't stick her, not mortally, not with Jackram watching. He'd try for something that'd hurt and make everyone laugh at her. That was the Strappy type through and through. Every inn counted one or two amongst its regulars. The corporal tested her more aggressively a couple of times, and twice, by luck, she managed to knock the blade out of the way. Luck would run out, though, and if she looked like putting up a decent show, Strappy would sort her out good and proper. Then she remembered the cackled advice of old Gubby Abbins, the retired sergeant who'd lost his left arm to a broadsword and all his teeth to cider. A good swordsman ain't coming up against a newbie, gal. The reason being, you don't know what the bugger's going to do. She swung the cutlass wildly. Strappy had to block it, and for a moment the swords locked.
That the best you can do, Parts, the corporal jeered.
Polly reached out and grabbed his shirt. No, Corporal, she said, but this is. She pulled hard and lowered her head. The collision hurt more than she'd hoped, but she heard something crunch, and it didn't belong to her. She stepped back quickly, slightly dizzy, with the cutlass at the ready. Strappy had sunk to his knees, blood gushing from his nose. When he got up, someone was going to die. Panting, Polly appealed wordlessly to Sergeant Jackram, who had folded his arms and was looking innocently at the ceiling. I bet you didn't learn that from your brother, Perks, he said. No, Sarge. Got that from Gubby Abbins, Sarge. Jackram suddenly looked down at her, grinning. What, old Sergeant Abbins? Yes, Sarge. There's a name from the past. He's still alive. I was the evil old sot. Well preserved, Sarge, said Polly, still trying to get her breath. Jackram laughed. Yeah, I'll bet. Did his best fighting in bars, he did. And I'll bet that's not the only trick he told you about, eh? No, sir. And the other men had scolded the old boy for telling her, and Gubby had chuckled into his cider mug, and anyway, it had taken Polly a long time to find out what family jewels meant. Hear that, Strappy? Said the sergeant to the cursing man, dribbling blood onto the floor. Looks like you was lucky. But there's no prizes for fighting fair in a melee, lads, as you will learn. All right, fun over. Go put some cold water on that, Corporal. It always looks worse than it is. And that's an end of it, the pair of you. That is an order. Word to the wise, understood? Yes, Sarge, said Polly meekly. Strappy grunted. Jackram looked at the rest of the recruits. Okay, any of the rest of you boys ever held a stick? Right, I can see we're going to have to start slow and work up. There was another grunt from Strappy. You had to admire the man. On his knees, with blood bubbling through the hand, cupping his injured nose, he could still find time to make life difficult for someone in some small way.
Private Bloodsnapper has a sword, Sergeant,
he said accusingly. Any good with it? Said the sergeant to Maledict. Not really, sir, said Maledict. Never had training. I carry it for protection, sir. How can you protect yourself by carrying a sword if you don't know how to use it? Not me, sir. Other people. They see the sword and don't attack me, said Maledict patiently. Yes, but if they did, lad, you wouldn't be any good with it, said the sergeant. No, sir. I'd probably settle for just ripping their heads off, sir. That's what I mean by protection, sir. Theirs, not mine. And I'd get hell from the League if I did that, sir. The sergeant stared at him for a while. Well thought out, he mumbled. There was a thud behind them and a table overturned. Carborundum the troll sat up, groaned, and crashed back down again. At the second attempt, he managed to stay upright, both hands clutching his head. Corporal Strappy, now on his feet, must have been made fearless by fury. He headed for the troll in a high-speed strut and stood in front of him, vibrating with rage and still oozing blood in sticky strings.
You horrible little man, he screamed. You...
Carborundum reached down and, with care and no apparent effort, picked the corporal up by his head. He brought him to one crusted eye and turned him this way and that. Did I join the army? He rumbled. Oh, Corporaline.
This is assault on a superior officer,
screamed the muffled voice of the corporal. Put Corporal Strappy down, please, said Sergeant Jackram. The troll grunted and lowered the man to the floor. Sorry about that, he said. Thought you was a dwarf.
I demand this man is arrested for...
Strappy began. No, you don't, Corporal, no, you don't, said the sergeant. This is not the time. On your feet, Carborundum, and get in line. Upon my oath, you try that little trick one more time and there will be trouble, understand? Yes, Sergeant, growled the troll and knuckled himself to his feet. Right then, said the sergeant, stepping back. Now today, my lucky lads, we're going to learn about something we call marching. They left Plum to the wind and rain. About an hour after they'd vanished round a bend in the valley, the shed they'd slept in mysteriously burned down. There have been better attempts at marching, and they have been made by penguins. Sergeant Jackram brought up the rear in the cart, shouting instructions, but the recruits moved as if they'd never before had to get from place to place. The sergeant yelled the swagger out of their steps, stopped the cart, and for a few of them held an impromptu lesson in the concepts of right and left, and, by degrees, they left the mountains. Polly remembered those first days with mixed feelings. All they did was march, but she was used to long walks and her boots were good. The trousers ceased to chafe. A watery sun took the trouble to shine. It wasn't cold. It would have been fine if it hadn't been for the corporal. She'd wondered how Strappy, whose nose was now about the same colour as a plum, was going to handle the situation between them. It turned out that he intended to deal with it by pretending it hadn't happened, and also by having as little as possible to do with Polly. He didn't spare the others, although he was selective. Maledict was left strictly alone, as was Carborundum. Whatever else Strappy was, he wasn't suicidal. And he was bewildered by Igor. The little man did whatever stupid chore Strappy found for him, and he did it quickly, competently, and giving every impression of someone happy in his work, and that left the corporal completely mystified. He'd pick on the others for no reason at all, harangue them until they made some trivial mistake, and then bawl them out. His target of choice was Private Goob, better known as Wazza, who was stick-thin and round-eyed and nervous and said grace loudly before meals. By the end of the first day, Strappy could make him throw up just by shouting. And then he'd laugh. Only he never really laughed, Polly noted. What you got instead was a sort of harsh gargling of spit at the back of the throat, a noise like... The presence of the man cast a damper on everything. Jackram seldom interfered. He often watched Strappy, though, and once when Polly caught his eye, he winked. On the first night, a tent was shouted off the cart by Strappy and shouted up, and after a supper of stale bread and sausage, they were shouted in front of a blackboard to be shouted at. Across the top of the board, Strappy had written, "What are we fighting for?" And down the side, he had written 1, 2, 3.
Right, pay attention, he said, slapping the board with a stick. There's some who think that you boys ought to know why we are fighting this war, okay? Well, here it comes. Point 1, remember the town of Lips? It was viciously attacked by Zlabinian troops a year ago. Sorry, but I thought we attacked Lips, didn't we, Corporal? Last year, they said Shufti. Are you trying to be smart, Private Manacle? Strappy demanded, naming the biggest sin in his personal list. Just want to know, Corporal, said Shufti. He was stocky, running to plump, and one of those people who bustle about being helpful in a mildly annoying way, taking over small jobs that you wouldn't have minded doing for yourself. There was something odd about him, although you had to bear in mind he was currently sitting next to Wazza, who had enough odd for everybody and was probably contagious. And had caught Strappy's eye. There was no fun in having a go at Shufti, but Wazza was always worth a shout. Are you listening, Private Goom? He screamed.
Wazza, who had been sitting and looking up with his eyes closed, jerked awake. Corporal? He quavered as Strappy advanced.
I said, are you listening, Goom?
Yes, Corporal.
Really? And what did you hear, may I ask? Said Strappy in a voice of treacle and acid.
Nothing, Corporal. She's not speaking. Strappy took a deep, delighted breath of evil air.
You are a useless, worthless pile of...
There was a sound. It was a small, nondescript sound, one that you heard every day, a noise that did its job but never expected to be, for example, whistled or part of an interesting sonata. It was simply the sound of stone scraping on metal. On the other side of the fire, Jackram lowered his cutlass. He had a sharpening stone in his other hand. He returned their group gaze. What? Oh, just maintaining the edge, he said innocently. Sorry if I interrupted your flow there, Corporal. Carry on. A basic animal survival instinct came to the Corporal's aid. He left the trembling Wazza alone and turned back to Shufti.
Yes, we attacked Lips too, said Strappy.
Was that before the Zlabinians did? Said Maledict.
Will you listen? Strappy demanded. We valiantly attacked Lips to reclaim what is Borogravian territory, and then the treacherous Swede-eater stole it back.
Polly tuned out a little at this point, now that there was no immediate prospect of seeing Strappy decapitated. She knew about Lips. Half the old men who came and drank with her father had attacked the place, but no one had expected them to want to do it. Someone had just shouted, "Attack!" The trouble was the Neck River. It wandered across the wide, rich, silty plain like a piece of dropped string, but sometimes a flash flood or even a excuse me, even a big fallen tree would cause it to crack like a whip, throwing coils of river round areas of land miles from its previous bed. And the river was the international border. She surfaced to hear,
But this time everyone's on their side, the bastards. And you know why? It's 'cause of Ankh-Morpork. Because we stopped the mail coaches going over our country and tore down their clacks towers, which are an abomination unto Nuggan. Ankh-Morpork is a godless city.
I thought it had more than 300 places of worship, said Maledict. Strappy stared at him in a rage that was incoherent until he managed to touch bottom again.
Ankh-Morpork is a god-awful city, he recovered. Poisonous, just like its river. Barely fit for humans now. They let everything in. Zombies, werewolves, dwarves, vampires, trolls.
He remembered his audience, faltered and recovered.
Which in some cases can be a good thing, of course. But it is a foul, lewd, lawless, overcrowded mess of a place, which is why Prince Heinrich loves it so much. He's been taken over by it, bought by cheap toys, because that's the way Ankh-Morpork plays it, men. They buy you. They will you. Stop interrupting. What's the good of me trying to teach you stuff if you're going to keep on asking questions?
I was just wondering why it's so crowded, Corp, said Tonka. If it's so bad, I mean.
That's because they are a degraded people, Private. And they've sent a regiment up here to help Heinrich take over our beloved motherland. He has turned aside from the ways of Nugget and embraced Ankh-Morpork's god-awfulness.
Strappy looked pleased at having spotted that one and went on.
Point 2. In addition to its soldiers, Ankh-Morpork has sent Vimes the Butcher, the most evil man in that evil city. They are bent on nothing less than our destruction.
I heard that Ankh-Morpork was just angry that we cut the Clacks towers down, said Polly.
They were on our sovereign territory.
Well, it was Labenian until Polly began. Strappy waved an angry finger at her.
You listen to me, parts. You can't get to be a great country like Borogravia without making enemies. Which leads me on to point 3, parts, who's sitting there thinking he's so smart. You all are, I can see it. Well, be smart about this. You might not like everything about your country, eh? It might not be the perfect place, but it's ours. You might think we don't have the best laws, but they're ours. The mountains might not be the prettiest ones or the tallest ones, but they're ours. We're fighting for what's ours, men.
Strappy slammed his hand over his heart.
Awake, ye sons of the motherland! Taste no more the wine of the sour apples.
They joined in at various levels of drone. You had to. Even if you just opened and shut your mouth, you had to. Even if you just went, no, 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 you had to. Polly, who was exactly the kind of person who looks around surreptitiously at times like these, saw that Shufty was singing it word perfectly, and Strappy actually did have tears in his eyes. Wazza wasn't singing at all. He was praying. That was a good wheeze, said one of the more treacherous areas at the back of Polly's mind. To the bewilderment of all, Strappy continued alone all through the second verse, which nobody ever remembered, and then gave them a smug, I'm more patriotic than you smile. Afterwards, they tried to sleep on as much softness as 2 blankets could provide. They lay there in silence for some time. Jackram and Strappy had tents of their own, but instinctively they knew that Strappy at least would be a sneaker and a listener at tent flaps. After about an hour, when rain was drumming on the canvas, Carver under him said, Okay, Dan, I think I've worked it out. If people are group R stupid, then we'll fight for group R stupidity, 'cause it's our stupidity. And that's good, yeah? Several of the squad sat up in the darkness, amazed at this. I realise I ought to know these things, but what does Groupha mean? Said the voice of Maledict in the damp darkness. Oh, well, when, right, a daddy troll and a mummy troll. Good, right, yes, I think I've got it, thank you, said Maledict. And what you've got there, my friend, is patriotism. My country, right or wrong. You should love your country, said Shufti. Okay, what part? Said the voice of Tonka demanded from the far end of the tent. The morning sunlight on the mountains, the horrible food, the damn mad abominations, all of my country except whatever bit Strappy is standing on. But we are at war. Yes, that's where they've got you, sighed Polly. Well, I'm not buying into it. It's all trickery. They keep you down when they piss off some other country. You have to fight for them. It's only your country when they want you to get killed, said Tonka. All the good bits in this country are in this tent, said the voice of Wazza. Embarrassed silence descended. The rain settled in. After a while, the tent began to leak. Eventually, someone said, what happens if you join up, but then you decide you don't want to? That was Shufti. I think it's called deserting, and they cut your head off, said the voice of Maledict. In my case, that would be a drawback, but you, dear Shufti, would find it puts a crimp in your social life. I never kissed that damn picture, said Tonka. I swiveled it round when Strappy wasn't looking and kissed it on the back. They'll still say you kissed the Duchess, though, said Maledict. You kissed the Duchess on the bottom, said Wazza, horrified. It was the back of the picture, okay, said Tonka. It wasn't a real backside. Would have kissed it if it was. There was some unidentified sniggering from various corners, and just a hint of a giggle. That was wicked, hissed Wazza. Nugget in heaven saw you do that. It was just a picture, all right, muttered Tonka. Anyway, what's the difference? Front or back, we're all here together, and I don't see any steak and bacon. Something rumbled overhead. I joined to see exciting foreign places and meet erotic people, said Carborundum. That caused a moment's thought. I think you mean exotic, said Igor. Yeah, that kind of stuff, agreed the troll. But they always lie, said someone. And then Polly realised it was her. They lie all the time, about everything. Amen to that, said Tonka. We fight for liars. Ah, they may be liars, snapped Polly in a passable imitation of Strappy's yap, but they're our liars. Now, children, said Maledict, let's try to get some sleep, shall we? But here's a happy little dream from your Uncle Maledict. Dream that when we go into battle, Corporal Strappy is leading us. Wouldn't that be fun? After a while, Tonka said, In front of us, you mean? Oh, yes. I can see you with me, Tonk. Right in front of you, on the noisy, frantic, confusing battlefield where, oh, so much can go wrong. And we'll have weapons, said Shufti wistfully. Of course you'll have weapons. You're soldiers. And there's the enemy right in front of you. That's a good dream, Mal. Sleep on it, kid. Polly turned over and tried to make herself comfortable. It's all lies, she thought muzzily. Some of them are just prettier than others, that's all. People see what they think is there. Even I'm a lie, but I'm getting away with it. Oh, quick time check. We're not at the end of where I thought we would be, but how are we doing for time? There's maybe 12, 13 more pages that I was thinking of doing. Should I go for it or should I stop here?
Go for it.
Go for it? Okay. Thank you. A warm autumnal wind was blowing leaves off the rowan trees as the recruits marched among the foothills. It was the morning of the next day, and the mountains were behind them. Polly passed the time identifying the birds in the hedgerows. It was a habit. She knew most of them. She hadn't set out to be an ornithologist, but birds brought Paul alive. All the slowness in the rest of his thinking became a flash of lightning in the presence of birds. Suddenly he knew their names, habits and habitats, could whistle their songs, and, after Polly had saved up for a box of paints off a traveller at the inn, had painted a picture of a wren so real you could hear it. Their mother had been alive then. The row had gone on for days. Pictures of living creatures were an abomination in the eyes of Nuggin. Polly had asked why there were pictures of the Duchess everywhere and had been thrashed for it. The picture had been burned, the paints thrown away. It was a terrible thing. Her mother had been a kind woman, or as kind as a devout woman could be who tried to keep up with the whims of Nuggin, and she died slowly amidst pictures of the Duchess and amongst the echoes of unanswered prayers. But that was the memory that crawled treacherously into Polly's mind every time. The fury and the scolding, while the little birds seemed to flutter in the flames. In the fields, women and old men were getting in the spoiled wheat after last night's rain, hoping to save what they could. There weren't any young men visible. Polly saw some of the other recruits steal a glance at the scavenging parties and wondered if they were thinking the same thing. They saw no one else on the road until midday, when the party was marching through a landscape of low hills. The sun had boiled away some of the clouds, and for a moment at least, summer was back, moist and sticky and mildly unpleasant, like a party guest who won't go home. A red blob in the distance became a rather larger blob and resolved itself into a loose knot of men. Polly knew what to expect as soon as she saw it. By the reaction of some of the others, they did not. There was a moment of collision and confusion as people walked into one another, and then the party stopped and stared. It took the wounded men some time to draw level, and some time to pass. Two able-bodied men, as far as Polly could tell, were trundling a handcart on which a third man lay. Others were limping on crutches or had arms in slings or wore red jackets with an empty sleeve. Perhaps worse were the ones like the man in the inn, grey-faced, staring straight ahead, jackets buttoned tight despite the heat. One or two of the injured glanced at the recruits as they lurched past, but there was no expression in their eyes beyond a terrible determination. Jackram reined in the horse. "All right, 20 minutes breather," he muttered. Igor turned, nodded to the party of wounded heading grimly onward, and said, "Permission to see if I can do anything for them, Thard." "You'll get your chance soon enough, lad," said the sergeant. "Sarge?" said Igor, looking hurt. "Oh, all right, if you must. Do you want someone to give you a hand?" There was a nasty laugh from Corporal Strappy. "Some assistance would be a help, yes, Sergeant," said Igor with dignity. The sergeant looked at the squad and nodded. "Private Halter, step forward. Know anything about doctoring?" The red-headed Tonka stepped forward smartly. "Butchered pigs for me mam, Sarge," he added. "Capital, better than an RB surgeon, upon my oath. Off you go. 20 minutes, remember."
"And don't let Igor bring back any souvenirs," said Strappy, and laughed his scraping laugh again. The rest of the boys sat down on the grass by the road, and one or two of them disappeared into the bushes. Polly went on the same errand, but pushed in a lot further, and took the opportunity to make a little sock adjustment. They had a tendency to creep if she wasn't careful. She froze at a rustling behind her, and then relaxed. She'd been careful. No one would have seen anything. So what if someone else was taking a leak? She'd just push her way back to the road and take no notice.
Lofty sprang up as Polly parted the bushes, breeches round one ankle, face red as a beetroot. Polly couldn't help herself. Maybe it was the socks. Maybe it was the pleading expression on Lofty's face. When someone's broadcasting, "Don't look," the eyes have a mind of their own and go where they're not wanted. Lofty jumped up, dragging at her clothes. "No, look, it's all right," Polly began, but it was too late. The girl had gone. Polly stared at the bushes and thought, "Blast, there's two of us. But what would I have said next? It's okay, I'm a girl too. You can trust me. We could be friends. Oh, and here's a good tip about socks." Igor and Tonka arrived back late without a word. Sergeant Jackram said nothing. The squad moved off. Polly marched at the back with Carver under him. This meant she could keep a wary eye on Lofty, whoever she was. For the first time, Polly really looked at her. She was easy to miss because she was always, as it were, in Tonka's shadow. She was short, although now Polly knew she was female, the word petite could be decently used. Dark and dark-haired, and had a strange, self-absorbed look, and she was always marching with Tonka. Come to think of it, she always slept close to him too. Ah, so that was it. She's following her boy, Polly thought. It was kind of romantic and very, very dumb. Now she knew to look beyond the clothes and haircut. She could see all the little clues that Lofty was a girl, and a girl who hadn't planned enough. She saw Lofty whisper something to Tonka, who half turned and gave Polly a look of instant hatred and a hint of threat. I can't tell her, she thought. She would tell him. I can't afford to let them know. I've put too much into this. I didn't just cut my hair and wear trousers. I planned. Ah, yes, the plans. It had begun as a sudden strange fancy, but it had continued as a plan. First, Polly had started to watch boys closely. This had been reciprocated, hopefully, by a few of them to their subsequent disappointment. She observed how they moved. She listened to the rhythm of what passed among boys for conversation. She'd noted how they punched one another in greeting. It was a new world. She already had good muscles for a girl, because running a large inn was all about moving heavy things, and she took over a number of the grittier chores, which coarsened her hand nicely. She'd even worn a pair of her brother's old breeches under her long skirt to get the feel of them. A woman could be beaten for that sort of thing. Men dressed like men and women like women. Doing it the other way round was a blasphemous abomination unto Nuggan, according to Father Jupe. And that was probably the secret of her success so far, she thought, as she trudged through a puddle. People didn't look for a woman in trousers. To the casual observer, men's clothes and short hair and a bit of swagger were what it took to be a man. Oh, and a second pair of socks. That had been gnawing at her too. Someone knew about her, just as she knew about Lofty, and he hadn't given her away. She'd suspected it was Eyebrow, but doubted it. He'd have told the sergeant about her. He was that sort. Right now, she was guessing it was Maledict, but perhaps that was just because he seemed so knowing all the time. Carver, no, he'd been out cold, and in any case, no, not the troll. And Eagle lisped. Tonka? After all, he'd know about Lofty, so maybe... No, because why would he want to help Polly? No, there was nothing but danger in owning up to Lofty. The best she could do was try to see to it that the girl didn't give both of them away. She could hear Tonka whispering to his girl. "I just died, so he cut off one of his arms and his leg and sewed him on men who needed him, just like I'd done a tear. You should have seen it. You couldn't see his fingers move. And he has all these ointments that just..." Tonka's voice died away. Strappy was haranguing Wazza again. "That Strappy really gets on my crags," muttered Carver under him. "You want I should pull the head off of him? I can make it look like an accident." Better not, said Polly, but she did entertain the thought for a moment. They'd reached a junction where the road down from the mountains joined what passed for a main highway. It was crowded. There were carts and wheelbarrows, people driving herds of cows, grandmothers carrying all the household possessions on their backs, a general excitement of pigs and children, and it was all heading one way. It was the opposite way to the way the squad was going. The people and animals flowed around it like a stream around an inconvenient rock. The recruits bunched up. It was that or be separated by cows. Sergeant Jackram stood up in the cart. "Private Corporal Durham." "Yes, Sergeant," rumbled the troll. "To the front." That helped. The stream still flowed, but at least the crowds parted some distance further ahead and gave the squad a wide berth. No one wants to barge up against even a slow-moving troll. But faces stared as the people hurried by. An old lady darted out for a moment, pressed a loaf of stale bread into Tonka's hands and said, "You poor boys," before being swept away in the throng. "What's all this about, Sarge?" said Maledict. "These look like refugees."
"Talk like that spreads alarm and despondency," shouted Corporal Strappy.
"Oh, you mean they're just people getting away early for the holidays to avoid the rush?" said Maledict. "Sorry, I got confused. It must be that woman carrying a whole haystack we just passed."
"Do you know what could happen to you for cheeking a superior officer?" screamed Strappy.
"No. Tell me, is it worse than whatever it is these people are running away from?"
"You signed up, Mr. Bloodsucker. You obey orders."
"Right. But I don't remember anyone ordering me not to think." "Enough of that," strapped Jackram. "Less shouting down there. Move on. Carver under 'em. You give people a push if they don't make way, you hear?" They moved on. After a while, the press of people abated a little, so that what had been a torrent became a trickle. Occasionally there would be a family group or just one hurrying woman burdened with bags. One old man was struggling with a wheelbarrow full of turnips. "They're even taking the crops out of the fields," Polly noted. And everyone moved at a kind of half-run, as if things would be a little better when they'd caught up with the mass of people ahead. Or merely past the squad, perhaps. They made way for an old woman bent double under the weight of a black and white pig. And then there was just the road, rutted and muddy. An afternoon mist was rising from the fields on either side, quiet and clammy. After the noise of the refugees, the silence of the low countryside was suddenly oppressive. The only sound was the trudge and splash of the recruits' boots. "Permission to speak, Sarge," said Polly. "Yes, Private," said Jackram. "How far is it to Plots?"
"You don't have to tell him, Sarge,"
said Strappy. "About 5 miles, said Sergeant Jackram. "You'll get your uniforms and weapons at the depot there."
"That's a military secret, Sarge," Strappy whined.
"We could shut our eyes so as we don't see what we're wearing. How about that?" said Maledict. "Stop that, Private Maledict," said Jackram. "Just keep moving and guard that tongue." They plodded on. The road grew muddier. A breeze sprang up, but instead of carrying the mist away, it merely streamed it across the damp fields in twisty, clammy, unpleasant shapes. The sun became an orange ball. Polly saw something large and white flutter across the field, blown by the wind. At first she thought it was a migratory lesser egret that had been left things a bit late, but it was clearly being blown by the wind. It flopped down once or twice, and then, as a gust caught it, blew across the road and wrapped itself around Corporal Strappy's face. He screamed. Lofty grabbed at the fluttering thing, which was damp. It tore in her hands, and most of it dropped away from the struggling corporal. "It's just a bit of paper," she said. Strappy flailed at it.
"I knew that," he said. "I never asked you."
Polly picked up one of the torn scraps. The paper was thin and stained with mud, although she recognised the word Ankh-Morpork, the god-awful city. And the genius of Strappy was that anything he was against automatically sounded attractive. Ankh-Morpork Times, she read aloud, before the corporal snatched it out of her hand.
You can't just read anything you see, Parts, he shouted. You don't know who wrote it.
He dropped the damp scrap pages onto the mud and stamped on them.
Now let's move on.
They moved on. When the squad were more or less in rhythm and staring at nothing more than their boots or the mist ahead of them, Polly raised her right hand to chest height and carefully turned it palm up so that she could see the fragment of paper that had soddily stayed behind when the rest had been pulled away. No surrender to Alliance, says Duchess, 97. From William de Word, Valley of the Neck, October 7th. Borogravian troops assisted by Lord Light Infantry took Neck Keep this mob. After fierce hand-to-hand fight, I write its armaments which are being turned on the rend. Borogravian forces at His Grace Commander Sirs told the Times that surrender had been view the enemy command. Load of stiff-necked fools, don't in the paper. It is understood. Desperate widespread famine. Across no altern invasion. They were winning, weren't they? So where did the word surrender come from? And what was the alliance? And there was the growing problem of Strappy, which had been growing on her. She could see he got on Jackram's nerves as well, and he had a struttiness about him, a certain sockiness, as if he was really the one in charge. Perhaps it was just general unpleasantness, but... Corporal, she said.
Yes, Parts,
said Strappy. His nose was still very red. We are winning this war, aren't we? Said Polly. She'd given up correcting him. Suddenly, every ear in the squad was listening.
Don't you bother yourself about that, Parts, snapped the corporal. Your job is to fight.
Right, cool. So I'll be fighting on the winning side, will I?
Oh ho, we've got someone who asks too many questions here, Sarge, said Strappy.
Yeah, don't ask questions, Perks, said Jackram absent-mindedly. So we're losing then, said Tonka. Strappy turned on him.
That's spreading alarm and despondency again, that is, he shrieked. That's aiding the enemy.
Yeah, knock it off, Private Halter, said Jackram. Okay, now get a...
Halter, I'm placing you under arrest for...
Corporal Strappy, a word in your shell-like ear, please. You men, you stop here, growled the sergeant, clambering down from the cart. Jackram walked down the road about 50 feet. Glaring round at the squad, the corporal strutted after him. Are we in trouble? Said Tonka. You guess, said Maledict.
Bound to be, said Shufty. Strappy can always get you for something.
They're having an argument, said Maledict. Which is odd, don't you think? A sergeant is supposed to give orders to a corporal.
We are winning, aren't we? Said Shufty. I mean, I know there's a war, but, I mean, we get weapons, don't we? And well, they've got to train us, right? It'll probably be all over by then, right? Everyone says we're winning.
I will ask the Duchess in my prayers tonight, said Wazza. The rest of the squad looked at one another with a shared expression. Yeah, right, Waz, said Tonka kindly. You do that. The sun was setting fast, half hidden in the mist. Here on the muddy road between damp fields, it suddenly felt as cold as it could be. No one says we're winning, except maybe Strappy, said Polly. They just say that everyone says we're winning. The men Eagle repaired didn't even say that, said Tonka. They said, you poor bastards, you'll leg it if you've any sense. Thank you for sharing, said Maledict. It looks as though everyone's feeling sorry for us, said Polly. Yeah, well, so am I, and I am us, said Igor. Some of those men...
All right, stop lollygagging, you lot,
shouted Strappy, marching up. Corporal, said the sergeant quietly, hauling himself back onto the cart. Strappy paused and then in a voice dripping with syrup and sarcasm went on. Excuse me. The sergeant and myself would be obliged if you brave heroes would join us in a little light marching. Jolly good. And there will be embroidery later on. Best foot forward, ladies. Polly heard Tonka gasp. Strappy turned, eyes glinting with sinister anticipation. Oh, someone doesn't like being called a lady, eh? He said. Dear me, Private Halter, you've got a lot to learn, haven't you? You're a sissy little lady until we make a man of you, right? And I dread to think how long that's going to take. Move! I know, thought Polly as they set off. It takes about 10 seconds and a pair of socks. One sock, and you could make Strappy.
That was a good ending.
Yes, I'm glad we powered through. I'm sorry if it's crazy late. How's everyone enjoying it so far?
Matt's here. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Matt!
Hi.
Hi, sweetie. How
Just
you
sort
doing?
of sit here quietly, like. Yeah. We're in lockdown again.
So you came crawling back to us.
Crawling back. Well, well, well. Look what the Matt dragged in. It's lovely to see you, sweetie.
But yeah, mostly came to see people. I haven't read Monstrous yet, and I probably will read it in the future. It's more to...
Who else have we got? Oh, we've shed a lot of people since yesterday. I don't know if they will be coming.
Andrada! I haven't seen Andrada in so long. Hello.
Hi.
Are those your feelings?
My darlings, as it is quite late and I haven't had my dessert yet, I think I'm going to toddle along now rather than hanging around for a little after chats. Hi, Liz. Hello. But yes, so I'm just going to stop the recording now. If everyone wants to say goodbye, hello to the catch-up crew.
Oh, catch-up crew.
Catch-up crew.
Hello.
Hi, catch-up crew. We love you. Good night. Good night. Good night.